What we have to do is listen to symptoms. People will tell you what they think is wrong. Directors do this with stories. Tech people do it, whatever. It's just tell me the symptoms. And it's like a lot of these already have the answer to, and the 20% I have the knowledge to learn.
Welcome back to the Render Bar podcast. My name is Steve Jacks. I'm a visual effects editor working in Hollywood, and joining me through the virtual computer box are my two amazing co-hosts, Richard Sanchez and Erica Robbins.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Today is a special day. You want to know why?
Why?
Thank you for asking. We've got our very first guest on the pod. That's right. This guest has worked as an assistant editor and visual effects editor and recently made the jump to picture editor. He's worked on shows for Disney Plus, Sci-Fi, and Peacock, as well as with the legendary Spike Lee on numerous Spike Lee joints, including BlacKkKlansman and Da 5 Bloods. He's had a unique stint shooting EPKs for films as well. You'll see his work as a picture editor on the second season of Dr. Death, streaming on Peacock on December 21st. I've known him for years. We've worked together twice, and he's got a mustache that rivals any you've seen before. Please welcome to the show, David Valdez.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. How's it going?
It's good. Living in the strike, which is its own version of the world, which is it's kind of nice, very boring.
Yeah.
If you put both of them together.
How long have you been struggling through the strike?
I worked until I did some sound mixes in July, but really till maybe the second week of June. And then I traveled. I figured I'd hit like a 3.5 years stretch of no break. So now I was like, okay, I'm going to take a break. I went to Japan. Now though, I'm like, maybe I should stretch my money a little more, but whatever.
Hey, you gotta take advantage of the time you have, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. In post, particularly.
Yeah. Was Dr. Death the last thing you worked on before the strike?
Yeah. So I was on that on the second season. I was on Mandalorian, and then in December I started work, and we wrapped in early June. Though I think we went over a little bit by about 6 weeks, which was great because of money. Yeah.
Great. So Dave, we're so glad to have you on the show. Like I said, I've known you for a few years now. We worked together on Happy. We worked together on The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett. So I know you know Erica and Richard through that Mandalorian universe. And remind me, did you and Dave work together on one of the Mandos?
No, I met him on season 3.
You met him in season 3, yeah. So I know Rich and I worked on Ahsoka, but through all the universe, it's sometimes hard to keep track who worked with who because the universe
we were on multiple. Yeah, we were on multiple. Even I had to think if I worked with Richard, just because I know Richard, and because we were in the same. We were going over tech things and workflows and stuff together. So
Facebook circles.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But it is cool how you sort of interconnected those teams through working on those Lucasfilm projects. Because sometimes, even in big studios, people have this impression that everyone is crossing elbows with each other, and sometimes it's really compartmentalized. And you're like, "Oh, you were there? I had no idea." And
right.
Even in the virtual space, the way you've kind of connected your teams as you sort of overlapped has been a really good way of introducing people and just allowing teams to share our techniques, our discoveries.
A lot of this happened just because of pandemic, where we were all working remotely and we weren't going in the office every day to have that everyday coffee talk, cooler talk. So when it became that we have been away from each other for so long, we just started to do these little meetups. And then it became somebody left this show and then went to another show, but they're still part of the group. So we just, hey, come on over out to the beer garden. We'll hang out. And now it's become like, I don't know, 30, 40 people that we have an invite going with all of post-production.
I didn't meet any of those people in real life until I was already off. And then, we meet up every couple months. It's really cool.
Yeah. So Dave, let's go back a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about your background in film and how you got started into post-production?
I guess it's a little meandering, I think, for a lot of people. It's sort of like you go through this road forever and you have a goal, but when you finally get there, you're like, oh, wait, I finally am here. But I was just a high school kid making movies, want to be a director. went to like a year film school program, which kind of like around 99, I went to a 1 year film program in Vancouver.
Hmm.
And then I kind of floated around for a while. Tech was way hard to get your hands on, like cameras and stuff. Then I decided I wanted to go to USC because that was where people go to direct. So I went to community college, got into USC finally. That was great in terms of I was in the critical studies program, so a lot of learning about film on the very fundamental levels, not a lot of production. But while I was in school, I started supporting myself. I started learning doing short films. I started learning Final Cut Pro. I don't remember what number, but I started learning how to edit when no one knew how to edit, and I was able to use that to start landing side jobs to make money. So I didn't actually realize I was learning. I didn't realize that was going to be my meal ticket as time went by. 'Cause years pass. I directed my own movie, a low budget horror movie called Clown Camp Massacre. And I have to cut that myself over a 2 year period. And that is actually really where I learned to narrative edit. Like that kind of forced me. I was very slow, but that was what taught me how to do that. Um, and then I met this guy Ryan in Denmark, and Ryan's from Albuquerque, and he was this editor. He was a success story from Albuquerque, where I'm from. That he had done this film festival, had met Spike Lee's editor, and Spike Lee's editor just took him back basically with him to New York. And Ryan would come back to Albuquerque and cut this summer film festival because he was just kind of giving back on some level. So I wanted to meet Ryan, and even though I was editing these things, I was like, "Hey Ryan, I'll be your assistant. I just want to learn how to do this." And so Ryan started showing me actual how a narrative workflow goes. And he wanted to get me hired by Spike Lee, but that was like when the industry was. This would have been like '08, and there was just not work, and I could not get. There were no second positions. It was first or nothing, right? And he was the first, so that didn't work out. But Ryan told me edit on as many things as you can, so you just learn a lot, and just be ready. So in like 2012, I started working as an editor in entertainment news. There's a place, Reels channel, so it's like Entertainment Tonight, basically. Very hard deadlines, but it's entertainment news. And they eventually transferred me out to LA, and I was basically I was a predator, I was shooting and editing my own stuff. And I was in LA for a couple years, and the that kind of money started falling lower and lower. And next thing I knew, I was editing. I was better than I was ever than I was, and I was editing YouTube videos suddenly because the market kept dropping and dropping, and people don't want to pay because they can get it cheaper. And I almost dropped out of editing. And then in 2015, my buddy Ryan calls me and he's like, I got bumped to editor. You have to move to New York if you want my job, but you can be a first, even though I never had any scripted experience in anything major. And next thing I know, I was Spike Lee's first assistant editor. And then I basically worked for Spike for 5 years, but in between, there'd be a lull and I would go work in TV with Ryan. And that's how I met Steve through the show Happy. And then that team eventually, after a long time, the Happy crew became the Dr. Death crew. And on season one, they bumped me to additional editor. And I worked with Ryan again, who was Ryan was doing all 8 episodes, but I was cutting scenes. And then when season 2 came along, I went to Mandalorian then between that and Boba Fett, got my VFX credits. And then I came, and then finally, when they bumped one of the assistant producers became the showrunner, and she took me with her as an editor onto Dr. Death season 2, and that's where
And there you have it.
we're at.
And that's it. That's
That's
awesome, man.
Yeah.
It's that easy. Everyone listening, it's just that easy, right?
I mean,
Well,
it took like
too,
7 minutes to get that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, and I feel there was a thing too. I felt older than some people, not older than everybody, but when I came in as an assistant, I was 35. And a lot of people break before that, but I had been on so many indies and so many things that, like, even when I got into the edit chair finally, I just blew everyone's minds because, like, I'd been editing all this stuff myself, but on top of it, my technical skills were so advanced that, like, I never had to think technically about the creative. You know how it's just like when you draw, you don't even think, when you write, you don't think like a kid is what letter goes after what letter. It's invisible to you. And that's how editing has been.
I'm glad you mentioned though that
Yeah.
you didn't have to think about the technical with the creative, because
Yeah.
I do find oftentimes technical gets swept under the rug in favor of creative. And not to say that creative is the heart of the craft, but technology and technique, I mean, the technical drives that creativity. And because you could just fly, you knew what was the newest features, what you could
Yeah.
do, what was feasible versus infeasible, what was expensive
Yeah.
versus
Yeah.
reasonable.
And what's possible. Like, I don't think people know how you can push things. And I just learned, I have time right now. So I've been studying audio program. I bought the Isotope suite. And I just saw the other day, the AI can split a song into stems, like a mixed song. And I sat there and that was like fire, discovering fire, because what I can do temping is now incredible. But no editor's gonna know that. I'm like I do know some insane technical editors, but they're at the top of the industry because of
Yeah.
that.
This is something we actually did speak upon in one of our episodes about AI, which were programs, software that does isolate songs, like you're
Oh
saying.
yeah.
And what we were talking about was how much assistant editors and editors can use that in their back pocket as tools rather than being
Yes.
afraid of their taking jobs away. How do you feel about that? Like with
Oh yeah.
what you're doing?
I love, like, for someone like me, I love pushing it so far. Like, so every little thing you can give me, I will figure. I'll play with it like a toy for a long time. I know all of us are. I think every VFX editor I ever met is a nerd in the best. Like, we will sit there and we will play an actual fun, because it is. I got obsessed with macros. I still am, like, because once I learned it, it was a toy, and you sat at the computer and you couldn't get enough. I don't In editorial, there are people like that. I would say, especially the way the industry shifted over the last, like, 6 or 7 years when streaming exploded, you lost a lot of technical people. So I think that skill is amazing. As it is, there's just not nearly as many people who can do it. It just expands what you can do incredibly. What I love about it is not everyone can do it. So it really becomes it's an advantage. Um, yeah, and it's just like I can do things I couldn't do. I've been thinking about the stems, and I would love to take a song everyone knows, and then pull out the vocal in a way that hasn't probably been done in forever. And people are just going to stop and they're like, I know this song. How the hell did that happen? And that's, it's people talk about AI as making things efficient. And it's like, well, if you make it too efficient, it's going to be dull. The idea is like just collecting time you don't usually have and now making something with that time. And just don't let your producers know what you can do.
Right.
They
That
will
is the
screw it
key.
up.
Having that stuff in your back pocket, ready to use when you need it
Yeah.
to, execute what you need. It's interesting that you had a lot of experience. It sounds like you've been cutting for a long time, whether it's on big projects, small projects. It sounds like that's been your drive. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to be, once I decided I wasn't going to make it as a director. Just as much as it just is such a crazy road. And how do you collect a check as a director at so many times? And then I had built this skill, and I'm not innately technical. Um, but when I want to do something, I get obsessive, and technical just seems this thing that grows out of it. And so I'm extremely technical, but it's not natural to me. It's just my curiosity pushes me until I know things. And then now I know everything, but it still always feels like I'm a creative who just somehow has been given a rote thing, but I'll go down that. So yeah, I wanted, like, it became editing once I kind of rolled off directing. And it's the storytelling, it's the something, it's just that part of your brain. I like that it's instinctive, that, like, I just get in this part of my brain, and it's like painting and story. I do love, it's all the things I just love. And as I get further into it, I'm like, it's the suckers who have to produce it. It's sort of like, you make it, you get the money, you stand in cold all night, you get stressed. I'll sit here and then I'll flex, And I remember I was really scared the first time a director sat with me because I got imposter syndrome. I was really scared they were going to point and be like, fake.
Yep.
And I sat with, I remember we're sitting with the director who saw my first cut and loved it. And I was cutting with her at one point, and she's a very smart woman. And as I was cutting, she's like, hold on, you're going too fast. And because she was happy, but she just couldn't track what I was doing because I was just. And then I realized, as smart as this director was, my life had been dedicated to editing from all these shorts I did, my features I've done, all this lifetime, and I realized, holy shit, I'm really good at this. And it wasn't because I thought I was going to get imposter syndrome pointing at me. Instead, I realized I had to slow down because I was moving too fast. So
It's a heartening feeling too. I know I've felt that personally, and I meet a lot of people who often feel like I'm not ready to take on this job because I don't know what I don't know. And the
yeah,
idea that at your level, I mean, that imposter syndrome is very real, but very normal. And in knowing that, it can become, if you know to expect it, I like to call it the curse of integrity. Like, you doubt yourself because you care so much about what you're trying to do, and you
yeah,
want to represent yourself well, you want to represent your team well, and there's
yeah.
this set, like, you have acknowledged the responsibility that is placed upon you, and you're taking that responsibility very seriously, and that can be a difficult thing.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a lot.
The only time I'm very, it's interesting now running my own edit room because I've taken pieces from every edit room I've been in before. It's just sort of like, oh, I'm in charge of this now, and I'm going to shape everything I like or not like. And I have a very calm demeanor most of the time. I mean, I'm never yelling, but at worst, I get snippy. But what drives me, what gets me upset is like when people don't put things on a pedestal. Like I've always put the job on a pedestal. I put the editor on a pedestal because they're holding the fire of the baton. How many people are when production's going? It's hundreds of people in pre-production, and suddenly I have the baton. If someone's not taking that seriously, it's infuriating. It's not just me and three people. It is 200 people. And how many, it's sort of, so when anyone's not done that, it's crazy because, our jobs are, we represent things, and there's a reason it takes 15-20 years to be here. It's so much, it's just so much knowledge. You have to have just knowledge down, and you have to understand it, and you have to take on all the stress. So if anyone does not love film that much, if anyone can think for a second, it's not that important. They're a different human being than I am, and I think most of my friends are like that.
And also your mention of that you don't feel technical, but that you'd sit with it and figure it out. It's funny too because that's such a real concept that so many people oftentimes feel that I'm not technical, as if technical is a state of being, like you have it or you
Sure.
don't. And I think you've broken it down in a good way too. Like, there's a sense of, like, I mean, yeah, I'm not technical by nature. I don't just sit down and understand
Yeah,
something automatically, but if you have the tenacity to sit there and go, I'm going to figure this out.
yeah,
And I mean, as well as I do, because we're both similar tech heads, in that figuring something out comes with a lot of frustration and a lot of not figuring it out first, but
yeah,
the dopamine rush that comes with accomplishing that, and you go, I can do this.
yeah.
You feel like Tom Hanks in the movie Castaway when he says, I have made fire.
Yeah. Well, I think honestly, I like pulling something off, but the knowledge is not is the missing, right? The knowledge is being lost and having to find out everything around it. That's where you map the knowledge, and then you get where you want, and you try to go back, and you kind of have an idea where it's at again, but you're still sort of flopping, but you're learning the board. And then one day you know where it is, and suddenly something comes in, and you're like, oh, I saw that while I was walking here or there, and that's the light just comes on. But yeah, the problem with me, I just can't read instructions. My brain does not. That's where I'm like, I'm not technical, and I don't pick things up fast. I have to be given a goal I want to do, and then I'll learn everything to reach the goal. But like thank God for YouTube, because I can at least start looking at something, and then go, because YouTube's always great for surface level stuff. But when you become an expert at anything, you walked off it. So
You're like, I know this already, Skip.
yeah,
You
well, they
know?
never go
Yeah.
super depth.
Yeah. I know what you mean, Dave. I feel the same way with my skills in FileMaker, for instance. A lot of
Yeah,
it is I need to execute this task, and that's what I'm trying to learn for that one
yeah,
thing. So it's difficult too, because I'm not as technical in like learning spreadsheets as
sure.
much. So in my head, it's not like I want to learn how FileMaker works in total.
Yeah,
It's more I want to learn to get to the goal that I have, just to get to
yeah.
the next task.
Yeah,
Um,
you just did a very awful thing for me. You just put a little birdie in my ear. It was like, maybe I should learn FileMaker before I go. I'm
It's like
like,
I
oh
got.
yeah, I
It's
would.
like, do I have the time? But
do.
no, I mean that's also a big part of it, Dave. Is that what you're
Yeah,
doing? Is you're respecting the craft, you're respecting the
mhm,
show that you're on, you're respecting all the people who put work into the show, to then walk in the room with having learned programs and putting time into uh, learning and informing yourself and educating yourself on things that can help your skills move forward to do the best you can
yeah,
in your piece of it, in your
yeah,
piece
yeah.
of that puzzle.
I think film people they're both important, and we take ourselves too seriously, because obviously at the end of the day we're making a movie. I met someone who is in charge of like international affairs in Southeast Asia for the Justice Department. When she was talking about things, I was like, you start to kind of get a context, like, but while we're in the bubble, there's a lot of money
Yeah.
burning here, and a lot of people's dreams, and a lot of, whatever. So yes, I kind of think of us like medical personnel. I mean, how deep do you need to know things? How long does that take? How long do you have to look? No one knows what we know for what we do. What we have to do is listen to symptoms. People will tell you what they think is wrong. Directors do this with stories. Tech people do it, whatever. It's just tell me the symptoms. And it's like, a lot of these already have the answer to, and the 20% I have the knowledge to learn. And it's so, that's an important thing, what you're saying about going into the room. I It's going to medical school to, we learn stuff in film school, but the real learning is sitting, trying to solve an export problem for 2 hours, or, so why is the database not populating correctly?
Right.
And you touched on something too. I love how you worded your means to learn things. Your macros started as a toy, and now they've become a major part of the way you work. And I think that's also it's a great way of introducing new workflow ideas, because I think there is a sense that when you're in the weeds, you don't really want to introduce something new, something that's
Yeah,
untested, because that could royally mess things up. But
yeah,
there's something freeing about the time you have in between projects where you go, this will be fun,
yeah,
and then when the pressure's off, oh,
yeah,
this is great, this is pretty cool, and then you go, oh my gosh, the time I can save with this now,
yeah.
let's really move this into the workflow.
Mhm.
Well, when a macro works, it's like a major shot of dopamine. And I started getting obsessed with him on Boba Fett, because I was able to I learned a wise thing: never, especially with important workflows, never go too many steps, and always ask yourself, what's the worst thing that could happen with this? And if it's bad, don't touch it. Right? I did something the other day with macros, and I can't even remember what it was, but I was programming something. Like, I have all my security cameras set up and whatever. I hit a thing, all my security cameras open up on my computer, and I'm like, good. I tap it again, and they all go away. And it's sort of like, what good programming, what macros and what FileMaker and stuff is you're just programming. Computers are programmed for everybody, and now you're making your own computer, which is exactly tailored to you or your workflow. And I mean, it's exciting, right? And then, yeah, it's sort of like, I think I've lived in two worlds, and that's been really fun. The tech, like a real, in fact, when I'm editing, when I first started, I had trouble keeping up with my dailies, and I didn't know why. I just thought, I mean, a little bit of his learning. You have to learn, you learn techniques to make your days. And once you do, you're like, oh, that makes sense. But the problem I was running into for the first 2 weeks, I had to go meet. I have this friend Joey Liu who jumped to editor at the same time as I did, and I asked him, "How are you making it through these things?" And Joey was like, first thing I did is I stopped being an AE, because your temptation, you're better probably than most AEs you're going to get, and you're kind of wanting to. It's an easy fruit, and you want to show what you're good at, and it's easy to grab it as your blankie. Like, oh wait, hold on, let me show you and hop in here, and you just burn 20 minutes right there, and you burn another. So suddenly you're losing 2 hours of your day because you need to set that aside, and that's kind of hard too. When you're in the crunch, you got to be like, okay, I know all this stuff, great, but I can't do it. I'm not. I got to walk away. I'm now this person, and I have to accept. I have to acknowledge that's my role.
Does it ever feel like, oh, doing that assistant work is satisfying, and that's why you
Yeah.
want to do it and get it done?
Yeah,
Because it's like,
I cut it short during. I've been cutting shorts on the side. Just I like cutting, but on shorts I don't have any help. I actually I make sure I do. I'm like, you don't need to give me an AE at the top, but as soon as I do a turnover, never talk to me again, because I'm not. Because in indie world, everything gets messy. I'm like, I'm not going to try to figure out your turnover to some person who doesn't know workflow.
yeah.
But I do. Part of it is I enjoy it. This on these other ones where I'm AEing, I started making tailored macros, and that's my joy. I was like, oh, I've just changed my workflow forever. And the thing with editing and workflows, I think because I'm from a creative background that learned technical, I I don't depend on a workflow that's given to me. I need to understand that workflow, and I can start to see shortcuts that didn't exist, or weird. You're like, oh, what if we tried this? And you realize any workflow was just people problem solving, getting some. It's a main path, and if you're
Yeah.
smart enough, you can go off the path and you can find your own little path that could be faster. You just have to understand your danger or inefficiency. But sometimes you walk somewhere, it's the wrong direction. You're like, okay, I get it. I get why it's like this or that.
That's all really, really great stuff. It's like learning how to pivot, and
Sure.
figures out being flexible and learning how to change adapt your workflow to whatever's needed for the show. Not so much saying this is how I do it, and this
Yeah.
is the only way. Yeah.
I've heard Richard say it for dozens of times about like going into other workflows and not saying no to workflow. You can't be rigid at all. Um, and sometimes it's frustrating when it's not efficient, but you just kind of roll with it. You listen to a podcast if you're going too crazy. But it's just being open. I find that in the edit chair. Whenever someone tells me to do something, I'm like, that's not going to work. It rushes through my head. I'm like, well, this is someone wanted something that maybe I don't like, but it's like, it's my job to audition it. And I would say 80% of the time I know and I'm right. But that 20% of the time, it's like I get excited because I didn't understand something and it worked. And now I'm like, okay, what worked about that? And it's sort of, and same thing with the workflow. It's sort of like, why is that faster? It is faster. That's fun. And I think a lot of every job is framing things correctly, realizing don't forget how cool our jobs are, how lucky our jobs are as well. And, because we work enough hours to forget that. But
That is true. I'm interested in something, Dave. When I knew you as an assistant editor on Happy when I was doing VFX editing, and then when I brought you onto Boba Fett, I know you are very interested in understand as an assistant editor, wanting to learn the visual effects workflow and learn those skills. So having done that on Boba Fett and Mandalorian, how how much have you gained from that experience, and how much have you implemented that in cutting or as an
okay,
editor?
yeah, that's no, that's a good question. The reason I wanted really to take, having having Mandalorian and Boba Fett was so good for your resume that no matter, I could have done whatever, and that looks great on your resume. I worked under the editor who cut Roma, and is this guy Adam Goff, very very good editor. And when Cuarón wanted to hire him, but they were in between projects, and Cuarón was doing something, and he told Adam, get a visual effects editor job between this, because when he was going to run things by the studio, having a visual effects editor credit was going to be major, because the studios would trust him as an editor to understand a visual workflow. So that made me know if I had an opportunity to go be a visual effects editor. So when I got the chance on Mando and Boba Fett, that was as good as that credit could be, right? So going through it, you do understand a lot of things. And the reason you could hire me, because I was unofficially doing that under Spike Lee for a long time. A lot of times AEs are kind of forced by cheaper productions to learn those skills. And I could do visual effects myself, but still it was like learning a massive amount of visual effects and learn a lot of skills and kind of look at the scale at the biggest levels. But as an editor, it was interesting. I got to watch the editors cut these. I remember watching. I think one of the editors came on and had never done that kind of thing, and she's like, "What do I edit? I don't know what to edit. This is all." And she just kind of had to edit the previses. And it's like, I didn't, I was nice watching someone else have to figure that out and never have to ask, what am I cutting when I go into this thing? But weirdly, I learned to cut. Well, every time you edit or on the other side, you're looking at how someone builds the things. But I learned exactly how long shortcuts can be. Because and I learned how to cut action. I actually learned how short something can be in your brain registers it. Because what we were always looking at, like I want to say, I feel like 7 frames is the shortest cut you can register by itself, and that's like a blip, or maybe it's like 9, but you can have like maybe a 5 and a 5 and a 3, or maybe a 5 and a 7 to. If you cut, they look the same. If the cuts look very similar, it looks actually like a camera movement because it goes so fast, but they have to be very similar cuts. So I learned that looking at so many action scenes, going through all the editor's cuts. And when I was cutting a surgery scene in Dr. Death, and I'm like, oh no, I could make that look pretty. I could make that give it more energy. We don't have particularly great coverage there, but I'm going to cut this shot. I have these 2 things matching. No one's reading what I'm doing. Like that kind of cuts so fast. And that was something I directly took from looking at timelines with action. And as I said, with action, you start to kind of understand how action goes together when you're cutting visual effects, because all you're doing is looking at one visual effects sequence after another visual effects sequence. And I mean, a lot of the rules of regular editing are in action. I mean, editing's just editing is the storytelling of editing is really having an audience know where they're at. So, ideally the story elements are playing out, but you have to orient people. You have to drive their eye, and then you have to drive them through the emotions, and then the information should be there. Sometimes it's not, and you have to create it. But ideally the information's there. That's why you're driving over here. But it's an editor the key things you have to keep reorienting people, but then you got to make what's the scene about, why this is an action scene. It's supposed to be exciting. That's an emotion. Scenes have to be cut fast because that's the emotion and the intent of the scene. But you got to make sure they understand where they're at. And we would do this scene after scene after scene, and you're learning the rules of how do I orient in action, because action's so much quicker, and we want to get to something, but we need to get here. And it's rhythmic, so it's like bam, 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 stop. Let's have a breath, but can we get something out of that? Can we do 2 things with our breath? Can we not only, all right, that's over here, but be over here that has a little bit. You're giving information, but maybe you're also getting a little bit of emotion, but you're understanding, and you're saving that for later because that's going to be something you want to use later. So yeah, visual. So it reinforces certain things. And then as an editor, I sit in a room and I mean, I can just talk about like, I know what I know what the problems are when people talk about it, and I can speak with the vendor and they can't bullshit me.
Right.
That's I think power is just there because they're saying blah blah blah. And I'm like, why is that an issue? Why haven't it's been turned around? We requested it. Like I was in a meeting, they had everyone was liking a thing, this monitor. I'm like, guys, look at there's so much spill. They didn't rotoscope that. They used some sort of key, which is fine, but they didn't clean up their work, and the sides are dancing, and no one was looking for that. So it's like you have the eye, you have the understanding, and you kind of have the dynamics of a VFX workflow and where people try to cheat.
Definitely. You
Yeah.
have an eye for visual effects now in your cutting style, not even
Mhm.
just as you're cutting, but when it comes to knowing what should be a VFX shot or not, if the VFX team is
Yeah.
missing it, or if no one else
We
catches
had
it, or whatever it might be.
yeah. Dylan, what's Dylan's last name? Dylan, I can't.
Fishing.
I've worked with editors who so insist a certain shot is done a certain way in the visual effect, and and they just turn the screws on the departments. Dylan was great because if Dylan would look at it and just ask first, is there another cut in here that is comparable that will save us a visual effect, or make everyone's workflow easy? And if there was, the answer was like, well, let's put that shot in there. And I know so many editors who are rigid, and it's like none of these shots are. If the shot's important, and sometimes all hell has to happen because the shot's important, and you're like, we have to fix that. It's too important. But if shot's not important, just switch it. It's not, this isn't
Yeah,
gospel.
and Dylan Fishing was one of our editors on The Mandalorian for our listeners out there.
He was huge in teaching me, um, you can get that work done and be cool about it. Because I've been in too many edit rooms where people just stomp, and there's no reason to stomp. It's just like I think
So
that's
true.
just old thinking. That's forwarded trauma. I don't know when that started, but people just pass it on to the next edit room and the next
That
edit
is
room.
true. That is true. And speaking of that, you've worked with Spike Lee for a long time on a lot of his
Yeah.
projects. So how, working with a director like that comes with its challenges. So what's like one thing you've taken away from all of those experiences?
Spike, working for Spike could be it was traumatic because I came in as a first, and I never should have come in as first, but that's just what the industry was, right? And Spike could smell. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And Spike does not put up a stupid at all. And it was terrifying. And I got reamed because I didn't know what I was doing a lot, and he has just like expectations. I survived. Spike saw I was a worker, and Spike saw I was actually I was taking it so seriously every time he told me something that about the 6-month point, I didn't think I'd be brought back for the next project, and I had a turning point with Spike where Spike suddenly was like, Spike actually decided he really liked me in like a course of a day, because he realized he broke me. And then he realized I was ready. It was the Marine thing, right? I just either you die or you don't. But once you get broken, you can be trained to be a fighting machine. And Spike loved that. But I learned a billion things while working for Spike, and I learned personalities. I know how to read people. I'm still a little. Those kind of editing rooms are much more volatile. So you learn to never be behind on things. Always know. Just think of what the next chess move is, and you don't have to have it solved, but you have to know that it can happen. And with Spike, because Spike wants to know what's going on. And I learned with Spike, if there was a problem happening, I can see a problem. Never let the problem happen and tell Spike what the issue was. He'll get mad at you. Tell Spike if something happens immediately. You can tell him or come up to him and know there's a problem and let Spike know and give him an option if that's a problem or not. But don't present it after it because I almost compare it to football. If you are a corner, you can't ever let the receiver get behind you because a touchdown is going to be thrown to them. So even if you give up yards, just keep them in front of you, right? And that's like with problems with Spike. I just had to keep the problem. I can never let the problems go over me. And just everything. The scale of things. I was in Spike had me sit with him 3 hours during every day because he would sit with the editor, and Spike trusted me, and he also liked that he wanted me to know everything because I had to then take that to the assistants, and if he wanted anything, I was right there and I can do it. So I sat next to Spike Lee for 3 hours a day during production, during it post, which I mean, talk about learning editorial. But yeah, so I really learned a very elite editing room, and how then and expectations. And then visual effects came in. They always turned to me because no one actually we had a visual. We would get vendors with Spike, and Spike had no visual. Spike could be he's just from a different generation. So I had to sit there and not let anything fly that shouldn't. I had to just take the reins and say this is good work or not good work. And Spike was like, all right, dude. Yeah, I mean, he was just like, he'd listen because he didn't know any. Yeah, I mean, he just trusted I knew, and we moved on.
That's taking initiative. That's having to step up. That's having to keep up. That's having to think ahead.
And
In
move
that,
and never say
yeah,
no.
yeah,
If you're in a post room and you might be in a weird one, someone might get fired. You may get pulled in. I know people who complain about that. Like they're mad they're having to do two jobs. It's like you're lucky. You're getting it might stretch you, but you are getting a
yeah.
chance to grow and getting experience. And yeah, I mean, I think those are all opportunities.
So, having recently cut Doctor Death season
Yeah.
2, and you were doing some cutting on season 1 as an additional.
Yeah, as an additional. So it was interesting.
Yeah,
I got to learn the drama, but I didn't learn the politics. I didn't sit with the
that's
directors. There's a
interesting.
second half to that I had to learn.
So, speaking of that, what surprised you the most becoming an editor on Doctor Death? Like, not becoming an editor. What
Yeah.
surprised you the most after having been sitting in that chair?
Sure. I mean, this is the funniest thing. I suddenly learned that editors are respected. I realized I had been in so many editorial rooms, and I had to say things 4 times for people to kind of grudgingly give that to me because it was always like an issue because that's what AEs do. They're kind of like putting out fires. And if you have a creative idea, even if they say pitch in, they might listen to you. Suddenly, everyone listened to me, and I was confused for a minute because I would say something and people would be okay, or like suddenly, just people who you used to have to deal and ask for 4 times, they get on it, right? So that was very disorienting. Um, I told you the speed, like putting the speed of being in an editorial room took a minute to adjust to. It was the early phase. I'm trying to think. I felt like I knew a lot of things. It was just sitting there for the first time doing it. And like my showrunner got notes from the network. A lot of it was like how things run and you don't understand. So my showrunner got notes from the network, and she was busy. She was showrunning 8 episodes. And I read them and I'm like, okay, so I'd seen other editors. So I went and tried everything in the notes so I could audition those for her. And she had just been busy, and like 2 days had passed, and she got back to me. She's like, I'm sorry. Let's sit in the room and I'll tell you which notes I want to do. And I sat there and I'm like, I did all of them. And she looked, and I wasn't supposed to do. I was supposed to wait for her. And she's like, okay, yeah, show me what you did, which I didn't need to do those. And then I auditioned those for her, and she accepted stuff she said no to because I had sat there and did it in a way that was acceptable. I believe we had less notes on that episode because I actually did some of their notes. Even though I didn't agree with them, I chewed the food in my head and I reprocessed it in a way I thought was okay. Um, and that was something I learned on indies because people wouldn't do things correctly. And you're like, how do I make this idea work? And you just sit there and you kind of think it out, and that's what editing is. You're taking things that aren't real and making something. And usually there's a plan and sometimes there's not. Fortunately, your best work usually comes out of the disaster, but you grind your brain to get there. It's satisfying after, but it just drains you because you're beating your head against something.
Mhm.
It's just it's schedules. it's dealing with an assistant and kind of giving and dealing with someone kind of like trying to feed them while doing your job, making your job easier, and not feeling bad about telling someone to do things. Because that's kind of hard, because in a way, you've always supported people, and now you're being supported entirely. Like you are someone, they are for you. It's not like a PA who's helping everyone. They're there for you. And you're like, okay, I want this to be rewarding for them. I need stuff. And also, part of his job was work from home. Part of his job was talk to me for 45 minutes because I was lonely.
Yeah, I mean, part of
Yeah,
that's learning how to be a boss, how to be a leader in
yeah,
your cutting room. You know.
yeah. And
Uh,
you want to be the buddy, but then at a certain point, you can't. At certain times, you can't be the buddy, and sometimes and sometimes you have to put your foot down. It was interesting. I'd get real mad at something something reasonably would happen that was a problem, and once or twice I went to send my AE to because there's four assistants, and they all had their episodes, but there would be groupthink and large things would become. No one was like maintaining a unity or something, right? And I remember being like, and I was having crashes, didn't know what happened. And my AE brain was like, how much room is on the project partition? None. They were just like, the backups are just eating things. And I got mad because I'm like, whose job is this? Right. And I kind of came down my AE a little bit, but then I'm like, okay, I'm like, all right, tell the other, you guys have to figure this out. And I sat there for a minute and I'm like, I'm like, I can't make my AE tell other AEs what they do. And I'm like, never mind. I'm going to make a call. And suddenly understanding politics suddenly. So then I called the post coordinator or post super. And, I've been a little bit worked up on it because it was something I'd never do as an AE. I think that's what ticked me off about it. And then I got on the phone, I breathed, and I was very polite and just presented the thing and being like, this is problematic because of this, we're losing work because of this. And she understood, and I explained, because she as a supervisor doesn't know a Unity, right? And it got done, and I I had to think. As in Spike's world, the AEs push people, everybody. Like we're sent like arrows, and I had to learn to play ball. TV is very much there. Play ball, be firm, pick your battles, and when you pick your battles, be nice. You know.
that is a good lesson.
Yeah.
Being nice, being kind, being like working with people the best you can. So, like, what advice would you have? Can you give to assistant editors looking for their big bump up to an editor, or any assistant editors who might consider a job as a VFX editor?
I think the VFX editor credit's gold, but then you got to decide once you get in VFX editing, people need them. I mean, you can work forever as a VFX editor if you're good, and then you got to and those will be easier jobs to get because there is a lack of them, a lack of good ones. So when you get in there, just make sure ask yourself, do you like this? If you just want to be an editor because there was some vague idea you decided when you got into post room, then you can be very good at something else and you have the opportunity. And the longer no matter what department you're in, you start becoming that person, right? So you start becoming better and better at something. So I would tell an AE first, if they don't have if you can get a VFX editor job, get it. But if you want to edit, you have to leave that because you're not going to make your connections with editing because those aren't the people you're meeting, right? And you start to get pigeonholed because you have to make an effort to get back out of it. You can, but you have to, and you're going to have to take less money. I mean, you get a taste of better money, and then you're like, get away because that's gonna be a drug. Um, I would say you have to just keep cutting on the side. Just pick up projects. I cut a feature, and I co-cut a feature, and I cut a short while doing Mandalorian, uh, and it was terrible. I mean, I was exhausted.
Yeah.
But I did it, and I just knew I needed to be sharp on my skills, and yeah, it made a big difference. And I was exercising that brain. I felt close to an edit room. I mentally didn't feel far away. And then I think get on TV show. I mean, really, if you're getting a feature's great. It's a much longer road to get up to be an editor. It's up to you. I mean, I like the feature world, but for getting into editing, TV seemed like probably was the logical choice. Get on the shows. If you can get an editor who will, ask to see if you can cut some scenes or something. I mean, ideally you get associate editor credit or something, but and if they won't let you cut scenes, just when you have a moment, cut dailies, and you don't need to just cut them to cut them if you don't get a chance to cut them. But cool editors will let you cut some scenes. I mean, they need to pay it, and they need to pay it forward. Editors don't let you do that. I really philosophically think they shouldn't be in the chair. I would also say you have to, going back, if you can, it's kind of contradictory. You want to be in multiple edit rooms and teams so you meet more people, but you also want to find a show that they bump people. A lot of shows, and it's not that, just find shows that people have moved up, and then get there, and so that'll be a huge thing. Attitude is obviously that. Sound, if you can kill your sound design. Sound design is actually, out of everything, you could really leave tone on that, and you can impress people if you could really nail your sound, and that they start thinking you creatively. Versus, problem with TV assistant editing is a lot of it is spreadsheets and doing tracking, and like features are way more creative, but you are needed there's windows, and when you get in the creative areas, grab onto that, start being thought of, and let people know you want to be an editor. I mean, you think that's obvious, but it's like the squeaky wheel theory. I mean, not in a bad way, but like when people know that's what you want to do. And that's why ideally you get an editor who's going to sit there and help you hop around, let people know. And eventually, if you get a vibe, your showrunner is not going to do that. Just do one show and get out of there. But good shows, I mean, most editors I know that in TV were promoted up from AEs from the same show, or at least the same showrunners. Because the happy people are the people who bumped me to editor and Dr. Death, the same production company. Yeah, I mean, I think that, and then make sure you have a good person, a good network too. Just go to places, because it's maybe I see Erica someplace, and Erica might introduce me to people, or maybe something pops open, and Erica can help put a word in for me, right? And nepotism is often used as a bad word, but in a networking sense, it is our neck every time. It's like it's hard bringing new people in. I think I heard Richard, you say something about this, because the stakes are high. And if you really are bringing something in, I mean, what's terrible is I might give a rec of someone I don't know if I don't know the other thing they're going through. If I know neither parties, I'm more apt to put them together. If I have a relationship with people, I'm going to try to vet people, and you don't necessarily have had to have this, if I know you, I can often pick up that you have the right people skills, or you have the right work ethic. I will recommend that person. So, but the nepotism of it is they're people, and you trust them. And then oftentimes they become your friends anyhow. And that's where it sounds like nepotism. It's like you hire your friends. Well, I'm hiring my friends who I made in editorial, not my friend from Albuquerque who's not in that, right?
Yeah. It's people you trust. It's people you trust to be able to just start and just walk in the room and just hit the ground running.
Yeah, absolutely.
You trust that they can just work independently versus having to teach someone. And teaching is great, but maybe not every project gives you that opportunity to teach.
There's something to be said too about, you become friends by respecting someone. You respect people who work well, coming from your working relationship. And there is something to be said too about even in the social context. I often find too, when there's someone who's up for a job who I haven't worked with, there's this sense of, I can still pass their name along with the disclaimer of, I know this person socially, I've talked to them, they sound like they really know what they're doing. I haven't worked with them, so I can't definitively say, but I think they're a good name. You should take a chance on them.
Well, and if you can get them into an interview then, right? So ideal, it's on them if they don't interview them. But if you can get them in an interview, then at that point, you probably have already vetted them without realizing you vetted them, right? So then now you're getting them in an editorial room and you're giving them their opportunity to talk to people. And if they are who you think you feel they are, you gave someone super qualified in that editing room. What happens from there happens from there. But the social reasons about this too, I think in our industry, there is like a shark mentality to or I don't know, I wouldn't call it shark, but when you see blood in the water, you don't want to be social with somebody because it just is like they're not doing their work well. And there's a taint there. And it's sort of like you like them, but there's something we're attracted to people who are good. We talk about our job so much. So if someone's got a bad attitude at work or isn't good at it, you don't want to have shop talk with this person because in some ways you're like, but you there's there is sort of, it's almost like a disposition. Like you want people who have a good attitude just as friends, but if they're a good friend, but maybe they're not, it's almost like how they do their job is like the second personality to you. And it's a weird thing. It's probably just human nature. We want to just hang out with the strong ones. But at the end of the day, I go to parties. I have a lot of friends, but if there's an editor there or an assistant editor, I end up gravitating to them because I just want to talk shop, and I don't mean to. Just no one understands my language. So yeah,
no one else gets you, Dave, but us.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's why you have this podcast.
That's why you're here, so we can talk about this stuff, and instead of to our other friends. Dave, it's been great having you on. Thanks so much for joining us on our show. Richard and Erica, do you have any final thoughts, any final questions, or anything you want to share with Dave, or anything?
You've been a gracious guest. I always love hearing you talk. I always love hearing your stories through Spike Lee. You and I have had our private conversations about that work. Always good having you on. And I swear I had to trim my mustache because I could not compete with yours.
But now you got the beard game going.
Yeah, for the listeners, David is sporting a extremely fancy mustache with the twirls. And it's always lovely to see it.
I mean, you'd make Sam Elliott jealous.
I walked into some network thing where a guy had a mustache about 4 times my length, and everyone looked at him and looked at me, and like it was going to be a mustache off. And instead, I was like, "Brother!" And me and that guy sat grinning, talking, and he kept complimenting my mustache, and I was like, "I'm not worthy." And it was beauty. I know what he puts into that. I would never want that on my enemies, but it was a thing of beauty.
That's amazing. Erica, any final thoughts?
I was just gonna say it's always great to talk to Dave. I feel like I always learn something new about him every time we chat. So thanks for joining us. It was a very fun conversation.
Yeah, it was fun. It was good seeing you guys.
Great. Thanks again. All right. We'll see you guys next time on The Render Bar. Look for our next podcast. We post about it bi-weekly, every 2 weeks. And I think our next show might be about networking, which we kind of touched upon this. So Dave, thanks for kind of helping us gear our heads into that conversation for next time. Thanks again.
The Render Bar podcast is brought to you by Master the Workflow. Master the Workflow provides training for those aspiring to become professional film and television editors and was created by working editors with credits on some of the highest grossing films and award-winning television projects. Our course, Feature Film Assistant Editor Immersion, is recognized as the industry standard worldwide. For more information, go to mastertheworkflow.com.